Before we say there is a human in the loop, we need to ask something more useful here. Where is the human actually entering the work? Because a person approving something at the end doesn't always mean human judgment happen. Sometimes it only means the person approved a response that was already shaped by the workflow. And that is the point I want to make here today. Human judgment is not a checkpoint. It is a design decision. Let's take a simple customer complaint example. A customer says they were charged for a service they didn't receive. And what happened? They contacted support before. The case was closed. Now the complaint comes back again. At this point, the goal should not be only to send a faster response. The real work here is to understand what happened. Because if the organization only replies faster, but never understands why the complaint happened, the same issue can come back again. It's going to be same complaint, more rework, and at the same time more frustration. And what happens? Slowly the customer starts losing trust. So let's compare two ways this workflow can move. Look at the first version. The workflow moves towards closure. And the complaint comes in. AI is helping here, is pulling notes, the policy, invoice, and the previous case history. It also prepares the response. Now what happens? Now here human approve it at the end. Case is closed. What happens? On surface, this looks efficient. Team responds faster. The customer here receives an answer. And your dashboard looks cleaner. This happens because a person approved the response. It feels like human judgment was still there because the human was sitting there. But this is where the risk here is. The response may be approved, but the cause may still be unclear. The customer is not only asking for your reply, they are showing that something in the work didn't happen properly. It can be the service was not delivered, maybe the charge was wrong, maybe the support interaction totally missed the point, and the case got closed too early. Whatever the reason is, the workflow shouldn't rush straight to response before someone understands what actually failed here. When the cause is missed, the organization becomes faster at closing cases, but not better at solving problems. And that creates a bigger issue. The same complaint is going to repeat in future because you did not solve the actual problem. The customer has to come back again. And your team has to reopen the case. And this also pulls in managers for escalation. And what happens over time? This affects trust, reputation, and business performance. So this is the problem with placing the human only at the end. The human may approve the message, but they may never get a real chance to understand the problem. And we can't say that this is judgment. This is actually approval. And approval is not enough when the real issue is still underneath the surface. So we need to understand problem, not just to close the case. The better way to approach is not to remove AI. Of course, not to remove AI. AI still help a lot. The difference is where human judgment enters. That is going to change the workflow. And in this kind of workflow of a customer complaint, judgment has to come before the response is logged. Why? Because the real value is not closing the complaint. The real value is understanding what needs to be fixed. If we look at this, how we can approach it better on this slide, this is a better version because AI still prepares the facts, is doing the job there. It brings together the history, what happened, and it shows what charged, and pulls the policy. It's gonna help you summarize here what happened before. And all of that is, of course, useful because the human is not starting from zero. They are starting with all the context. But now the workflow creates a judgment point here before the response is prepared and approved. This is where the human looks at the case and says, what we actually are dealing with here, not just what answer should we send. They are asking what is real problem. And that question changes the work because complaint may look like a billing issue, but underneath it, there may be a service failure. It may look like a single customer case, but actually it may show a broken handoff. It may look like something spot already closed, but in fact, that the customer came back tells us the issue was not really resolved. That is where judgment matters. The human is not there to rewrite the response. They are there to understand the situation before organization answers it. Once that happens, response become more useful because it helps you to make the owner clearer. The fix becomes clearer here, and the workflow can learn from the complaint instead of just closing it. And that is the actual value. It helps the customer get better answer, the team avoids repetitive rework, and the business here is gonna protect trust. And the organization starts seeing where the process is breaking. That's very important here. That is what human judgment should do inside AI-supported workflow. It should not sit at the end as a final click. It should sit where the work needs meaning, where the organization needs to understand what is really happening, where the decision can still change the outcome. That's the point that matters. And it is a really simple point, which is a human at the end can approve a response, but that doesn't always mean the problem was solved. Problem was understood, and we need to understand the problem first. If the problem is not understood, AI may help the organization on respond faster, while the same issue keeps repeating. And if it keeps repeating, that's not the value we want. And the value is always a better resolution there. The value is when we get fewer complaints next in future, when ownership is clear, with a less rework, and it builds the customer trust. That's value. And a workflow that learns where it is breaking. So before we say, don't worry, a human approves it, a human was there, just was there, we need to ask, where does human judgment actually belong in this workflow? That changes how you are going to get the value. And this example, it belongs before the response is logged, because someone here needs to understand what happened. That's important. What caused it? What needs to be fixed? And who owns the outcome? That is the design work. AI can prepare, summarize, AI can, of course, support, but human judgment has to sit where it can change the quality of the decision. That matters. Human judgment is not a checkpoint in each and every workout. It is a design decision that we make after understanding the nature of the work.